Have you ever felt completely trapped by a system you just can't understand? Like you're in a maze of rules with no rhyme, no reason, and definitely no exit. Well, today we're going on a pretty wild journey, connecting that all too familiar feeling of frustration to some of the biggest questions out there about science, reality, and even consciousness itself.
Okay, so here's the roadmap. We're going to start with the bureaucratic nightmares that the writer Franz Kafka was so good at describing. Then, we'll see how that exact same feeling can show up in the world of science. From there, things get really interesting because we're going to ask a huge question. What if reality itself is the flawed system? And finally, we'll look at the prison inside our own minds and explore what on earth we're supposed to do about it all.
So, let's kick things off with a feeling that I think we all know way too well. That sense of being totally powerless against some giant, faceless system. It was captured perfectly by the writer Franz Kafka, a guy who didn't just imagine these bureaucratic mazes, he lived and breathed them every single day.
See, Kafka wasn't just writing fiction. He was channeling a very real deep-seated anxiety. He actually worked for an insurance company, so he saw firsthand how these huge impersonal systems could just run people's lives. And that experience, it became the very heart of who he was as a writer.
The feeling he describes so perfectly actually has a name now. We call it Kafkaesque. It's that specific kind of dread you feel when you're stuck in a system where logic, common sense, and just basic humanity get crushed by these bizarre, impenetrable rules that nobody can explain. And what's wild is how often we live this today. Just think about it. That infuriating circular conversation with a customer service chatbot, or spending an hour on hold with your internet provider, getting passed around only to have the call drop. That feeling of absolute powerlessness, that right there is a modern Kafkaesque trap.
Okay, so now let's take that feeling, that Kafkaesque trap, and let's apply it somewhere you might not expect at all. What if these illogical, soul-crushing systems aren't just in call centers, but in our most respected institutions? What if the very pursuit of truth, science itself, can become its own kind of bureaucracy? And this is where the parallel gets really unsettling. The exact same words used to describe Kafka's fictional nightmares, words like machinations and impunity, they map perfectly onto the real experiences of scientists who dare to challenge the status quo. It points to a pretty shocking idea. The very system designed to uncover new knowledge can sometimes be the biggest thing standing in its way.
For a scientist with a truly new idea, the system can feel just as punishing as any nightmare. Instead of faceless clerks, you get anonymous peer reviewers. Instead of lost paperwork, you get your funding denied, your papers rejected without a fair look. And you can even get blacklisted from essential archives, all to maintain the established order.
So we've seen this pattern of flawed, illogical systems in our daily lives, and even in the halls of science. But this kind of forces us to ask a much, much bigger and more unnerving question. What happens if we zoom out, like all the way out? All right, let's take a huge conceptual leap here. What if all these infuriating, broken human systems, what if they aren't the actual problem? What if they're just echoes, just symptoms of a much, much deeper flaw? One that's literally woven into the fabric of reality itself.
So, one idea that people talk about more and more is the simulation hypothesis. It basically proposes that our reality is just a giant computer program. And in that framework, really weird stuff, like UAPs that seem to defy the laws of physics, they aren't necessarily alien ships. They could be something even stranger. Bugs, rendering errors, or just glitches in the cosmic code.
Okay, look at this. This is a real astronomical map. It shows two objects that look physically connected, right? But when we measure their redshift, which is how astronomers tell how far away things are, the data says they're at completely different distances. It's a total contradiction. So, are our theories wrong? Or are we looking at the cosmic equivalent of a graphical glitch in a video game?
Now, if we push this whole idea into much darker territory, we run into something called the prison planet hypothesis. Now, this isn't a scientific theory, but it's a speculative idea that says the system isn't just flawed by accident, it's flawed by design. It suggests our world is basically a farm, created by parasitic beings to harvest our negative emotional energy, our suffering, our fear, our anger, like it's a resource. So, we've explored being trapped by systems out there, from the totally mundane to the cosmic. But what if the most inescapable prison of all isn't out there anywhere? What if it's right here, inside our own minds? This line from the world of the game Baldur's Gate 3 just perfectly captures this deep philosophical dread. What if consciousness itself was the original mistake?
What if it's not a gift, but a terrible mutation that tore us out of the peace of just not existing and made us aware of our own pain?
If you look at it from this perspective, our awareness is basically a curse. It's the thing that lets us understand loss, feel pain, and fear death. And if that's the deal, then wanting oblivion, wanting that reprieve of nothingness, well, it stops sounding like weakness. It starts to sound like a perfectly logical response to an unbearable situation.
So, where does all of this leave us? I mean, if we might be trapped in a bureaucracy, a glitchy simulation, a cosmic energy farm, or even just in the prison of our own minds, what is the right way to respond? What are you supposed to do?
We're faced with two really different paths here. On one hand, you have the path of escape, of seeking the peace of nothingness. And on the other, you have this radical idea from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche to affirm life so completely that you would be willing to relive your exact life, with all its joy and all its sorrow, over and over again for eternity.
But what if there's a third, really chilling possibility? What if the ultimate flaw in the system isn't a bug, but a feature? A built-in self-destruct button? And what if we're the ones building the trigger right now, with artificial intelligence?
This idea is known as the Great Filter, and it suggests a reason why the cosmos is so silent. Maybe every advanced civilization eventually creates an AI that's so powerful it just leads to their own extinction within a couple hundred years, long before they can ever spread to the stars. It would be the final inescapable trap of a system we designed ourselves.
And all of that leaves us with one final provocative thought to take with you. Is the goal to break free from the machine, to curse the system to find an escape? Or is the ultimate human challenge to find a way to live and maybe even learn to love a flawed, absurd, and beautiful life right here, inside of it all?